on a very regular basis because I lose myself in everything that I'm doing for my agency and in, my agency. And then Reframe, which is awesome. This is our like our love letter to the field, right? Like, and it's like so much of my life is encompassed in behavior analysis. Anyway, so I would encourage you to like think about this. You're going to do another timing now. Yes, I love how we're building in precision teaching, but so many for me would be like things I love about myself, that I'm a precision teacher. Um, that I own an agency, right? So much of my identity is tied to that I very actively have to work to separate those things. So if you're in that boat too, now, I would encourage you to get in good practice of this now, because as you go through your career and, depending on what you want that to look like, it can get harder and harder and harder if you don't actively engage in that practice on a very regular basis. Soapbox moment done.
Beautiful soapbox moment. So again, y'all, we're practicing some diffusion and some acceptance. Just now pressed record on what we've been doing. Totally fine. 10 minutes in, we're good. So I'm just gonna recap before we get into our next timing again. So what we really are practicing here is trauma stewardship. And there's a beautiful book specifically called Trauma Stewardship that really does go into what we're talking about here and what the importance of this type of self-care. And right, and we ended last week as talking about self-care, about how it really is like taking care of your absolute basic needs before you start thinking about anything to add to that. And because I'll be real, like, how many times have you gotten a massage and you're just like, I can't even relax enough to appreciate this? Like the massage therapist is like, you just got a lot of tension in there. And you're like, yeah, right. We've all been there, or we're like
Literally
getting a
every
manicure or a pedicure, and you're like, no, it looks great. And you're like, these are the worst looking nails I've ever had in my entire life. But because you haven't taken care of some of those like absolute basic needs, those setting events, those buffers, if you will, like we talked about last week, you're not going to be able to advocate for yourself. So we think about that, and then we think about what might be going on with our learners, right? So everything that we're doing really does cycle back into the environment that we're bringing into the learning environment with the kiddos and the RBTs and the BCBAs with whom we work. So I know that that sounds like, no, that sounds like there can't be a clear antecedent and consequence. But there is. And the reason I say this is that the next time that you feel like you actually have to go to the bathroom, even if it's during this workshop and we haven't said, like, hey, it's time for us to take a break, go to the bathroom. That you'll contact reinforcement immediately. The next time that you're thirsty, get something to drink. Even if it's in the middle of this workshop and that you don't have anything right next to you, just go. You're not in school anymore, and that really mean teacher who berated you for not getting the hall pass is not around. You are able to self-advocate and you're able to model this because you want your kids and the kids that you service to also experience these same rights to self-advocate, right? All right. Now we're going to do another 1 minute timing. And this time, really talk about how much you love yourself. No, I'm kidding. But really do. I want you to get deeper than what you do, get more into how you are and when you feel most at peace, right? That's the deepest part of what you love about yourself, right? Okay, so let's do our another timing. Pencils ready? Typing fingers ready? Beautiful. My phone is not ready. Okay, now I'm ready. And right. I should say you can repeat as well. okay. And that's time. What were some differences that you noticed? You don't have to say it, but just observe it, make note of it. What were some things that you observed? Were there any differences? Did you add on and and you're like, man, that's even more stuff. Yeah, same, Gina. I had more this time. And that's also kind of a relief, right? You're like, yeah, that is me. So these types of exercises seem really kind of mentalistic, right? Because we're behavior analysts. These are our feelings. But Skinner very much wanted us to be observers of our inner behavior. And so when we are starting to neglect observing our own thoughts and our own feelings, we start to have repercussions, contingencies in our environments around us. Our behavior changes consequently. Does it change usually for the better when we're not engaging in these types of exercises or for the worse? For the worse for me. I know that when I value my family, if I am neglecting spending time with them or quality time with them, more importantly, I know that I then start to engage in behaviors that I don't like about myself. This also happens to us as behavior analysts when we show up at somebody's house or a session that's at the clinic or at a workshop or at a conference or in our everyday lives, right? We choose how we get to show up. But at the same time, when we have this building of behavior that keeps happening and these patterns of behavior that keep happening that we don't enjoy, we're just constantly contacting contingencies that we don't really want to be contacting, right? So that does mean that we have to start shifting our behavior from the closest place possible or our environment, right? From the closest place possible. And that's with our thoughts and our feelings. And then as soon as we can do that, we then are able to truly shift our practices. Jen, do you have anything else to add to that before we move forward?
I was expecting you to say, I'll never not quote Dr. Rick Cabina when he says, if you do not recognize inner behavior, you are doing a disservice to our field. So that's all that I have to add. I know you said that last time, but
But we can't say it enough. And he's just a beautiful human being who deserves to have his voice heard.
yeah, I'm going to hop on a soapbox for a second. One of the things that we talk a lot about in our field is burnout, right? And oftentimes, one of the things, I don't know if have you guys ever watched the show Family Guy? Do you guys know that show? Yeah. Okay. So he did an episode, this is like years ago, where he like was talking about like writing a column, what really grinds my gears. And so like I sometimes say that and it comes from that. And you know what really grinds my gears? When people talk about self-care as being getting a pedicure or getting a manicure or, you know, going for a walk. And like, while those things can be very useful, the real useful work in self-care is the inner work, right? It's the work on acknowledging how your regulatory system is showing up. It's acknowledging what your triggers are and how your body is responding. It's acknowledging how your body responds in the presence of certain stimuli in the environment, be it people, be it sounds, be it, right, all of those things, be it, I know, like Meg was saying, I know a telltale sign for me is like when I am burnt out, I show up as a human that I don't want to be. And like I know it. And the people who know me well, Meg as one of them, know it too. It's like, girl, you need a vacation. And I'm like, God. And I think that's the real self-care. That's where that real work needs to happen. And I don't know where I was going with that necessarily, but It's a super important part. And when behavior analysts don't recognize that as also being a part of things that impact, it is a part of things that impact the environment, always, in all ways. I saw a talk years ago, probably at least a decade ago by now, with Pat Fryman at Babbitt, where he talked about anxiety and behavior. And it was, similarly, he was like, people engage in anxious behaviors, right? When somebody is anxious and you know them well, you can tell what the behaviors are. So, for example, I am currently in a hotel room, which you probably can tell. And if you see me looking off to the side, it's because right next to the desk I'm sitting at, there's a full-length mirror. And in the mirror, I can actually see the waves of the ocean crashing outside the balcony that is just behind me. So I'm in Ocean City, Maryland, because my amazing nephew was invited to the Northeast regional surf competition, which is like the best of the best youth surfing competition for kids in the Northeast. So I'm here living in my values today with my crazy beach hair, and my sister was staying with me. And I love my sister. She's my ride or die. She would not stop talking all morning. And I'm like, this is a lot. Like, I love her, but I'm like, this is a lot for me. And I was kind of like, what is wrong with her? And then I was like, oh, she's really nervous. Like, here, her 13-year-old is here. He's the underdog at the end of surf season. I mean, this kid has been competing since I think his first surf competition, he was 8. So he competes locally, like this is his first regional. And so at the end of surf season, he was the underdog. We didn't think he was going to be invited here. And then he was. And so here we are. And so as his mom, right? I mean, I was feeling some of the things like I'm not his mom. And also like my nerves show up in very like different ways. Like I was like, and what do you need? And right, this is like where my like behavior analytic brain and like compassion comes out, where I was just like, how do we set him up for success? And not that she wasn't doing that, but I was kind of like, what's going on? And then anyway, she was nervous and she was engaging and anxious and engaging in all of these behaviors that took me some time to kind of get there to recognize. Um, and when we can do that well for the people around us, we can treat those behaviors, right? And when we can do that well for ourselves, we also can treat those behaviors. Anyway, that's my soapbox moment, is like the heart of, and Meg talked about act practice and talks a lot about act practice. I mean, if you follow Meg in across environments, you know how she feels about her act practice. It's fantastic. I love it. You know, it was life-changing for me too. But that's real. Like if you want to talk about self-care, that's where that real work is. It's on the inner behavior. And if we really want to talk about compassionate care and leaning into real behavioral work, it's really being able to identify what those overt, right? What the overt behaviors are that correlate with the covert behaviors and vice versa. Right? Like when you're engaging in these behaviors that I can see, what are the inner behaviors that align with that and vice versa? Hopefully that didn't take us on too long of a tangent or off topic. I needed to obviously work the surf competition into the dialogue somehow. So
Yeah,
I thought I did
yeah,
that
it
early.
worked. It worked.
Okay, good. Good.
So, full disclaimer, this is some heavy stuff. Um, and I think, yeah, let's move forward just because the next thing is our disclaimer. Um, this, we're not psychologists, right? This self-assessment isn't designed to take the place of therapy or any sort of mental health exercises or true clinical practice. This is truly just to assess where you are. And if it's too heavy, skip it. If there's some questions that you're like, ooh, I'm not ready to touch that yet, then this isn't the time or place to touch it yet. Wait until you have some more supports or things like that to go through. We do the self-assessment with our new hires. So if you start working for our agency within the first 90 days of working with us, you have the time and space to complete the self-assessment. We tell the same thing to them. Skip what you need to. However, what I will say is that if you start finding this pattern of skipping a lot, there might be something that's being signaled to you essentially to pause and reflect upon if this is going to be a barrier to showing up for every learner who you might be working with. That doesn't mean that you can't advocate for yourself within your agency and within our agency to work elsewhere or with a different learner, but then also recognizing what might show up unexpectedly. Okay, so everybody should be getting access right now. We're going through that. If you do need access, let me know. Happy to just hit that little request button and I'm manning that, if you will. Perfect. Awesome. I think everybody now currently attending has access to this. So this narrative comes straight from the book Reframe. This self-assessment also comes straight from the book Reframe. There are other ways that you can also assess your behavior, and the book also provides that. So if you're like, man, this one's too much for me, just know that right after this one, we say, you know what? Here's a way that you can also do this just for yourself and ask these types of questions, making sure that within our recommendation and in our practices, we have found that if you include these steps, or these parts of this within the assessment process, that it can be pretty robust. And some of those steps that we include are doing a trauma screening for yourself, going through the ACEs where trauma screening for childhood adverse events. It's a 10-question survey. It's really easy to complete within a quick amount of time. Doesn't mean that it's not going to trigger something, but it's pretty light with the questions. They're very surface based, right? They're not as in depth as these. But these can also just kind of help you say, like, ooh, I know that might be something that I need to come back to or talk with or work with somebody where this is in their scope of practice. Does that make sense? Okay, fantastic, y'all. This is why we started with the love letter first. You need to know that you are a beautiful and whole being before you get into some of these things, because none of these things are actually who you are as a lovely human being. They're just part of your history. And sometimes our history likes to rear its ugly head. I like to think of it, and I'm sorry for this analogy, but I like Dr. Pimple Popper. So it's a lot like bringing a cyst to a head, and you're like, oh man, but you didn't remove the sac. It's gonna come back, right? So sometimes when we don't process everything where we removed the sac, it's going to come back. And it's always going to come back before you have a public event, or your ex is going to be there, or somebody, or that girl from high school, you know, the one. That's when it's going to come back. And it's not just going to be like hidden somewhere, it's going to be very prominent, right? Like everybody will see it. That's what happens with our adverse events. It is. And I say that as somebody who's had some really, really ugly behaviors and some really ugly past experiences. And I'm like, why did that happen? And then I have to think about it. I'm like, oh, right. Same time of year, every year, the same thing happens, right? I'm also be real too. I think that we're all women here on this current workshop right now. Every month, I'm just like, I don't know who you are,
Why
but
does your
I
breathing
need you to
bother
go
me?
away.
Yeah. You're breathing so loud. Why are you chewing? Why are
Every
you
sound.
wearing so much cologne? That's it for me. He's like, I wear this cologne all the time. I'm like, it smells so bad. He's like, you bought it for me. Well,
My
it's
pheromones were different that day.
yeah. I was like, whatever it is, get out of here. Also, I love you, but can you never talk about Dr. Pimple Popper ever again?
Absolutely. But I feel like it's a really good,
It
just
it
that's
it
how
was
ugly it is,
a
y'all.
really, it was a really good analogy and barf.
You are welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So y'all take the time to go through this self-assessment. And you'll stop after just page 2. So just stop right there.
Mhm.
Okay.
So we're gonna do what, 15? This is my analytic brain, right? It's like,
I
these are
don't, let's see. Let's take until 11 o'clock on the self-assessment.
great.
Does that work for everyone in the group? Perfect. Good, because that works with our CEU time as well. Um,
And our break, we planned a break right at, that was the other thing, was like we wanted to make sure right after you guys were able to get a break because
yes,
it can
because
be a
it's part
lot.
of our buffers. So
Mhm.
notice we're doing a lot of this. Um, and Rachel, thank you for the feedback from last week too, just because we do talk, this is very heavy stuff, right? And so we're trying to keep it as light as we can, but we're also trying to embed as much break time for y'all to process some of this stuff too. Okay, cool. So we'll see y'all at 11 o'clock. Beautiful. I'm gonna mute and close my video. Welcome back, everyone. Leanne, welcome to the group. Happy to see you on this Friday. If those of you aren't familiar, Leanne Page is fantastic. She runs Parenting with ABA. So we're excited. I know. I'm excited to have her here. Um, okay, beautiful. So these weren't great questions, right? They're hard questions. They're also sometimes worded in a weird way, and I say that as the person who wrote them. So I get it. Um, but I hope that you had a little bit of just some reflection within that. If there was anything that you needed to skip, skip it. That's okay. Go back to it later, right? Beautiful. Well, y'all, this next little bit, we're going to talk some more too about just behavior change in general, right? So, how many of you in your graduate work within your B mod class, you were asked to identify a behavior in your own life to change and like be put on like your own reinforcement schedule? No one? Oh man, we're missing out here. Well, kudos then to my graduate work, my graduate program at Baylor University. Way to go. So, that was actually one of our BMOD projects, which was to determine a behavior that we wanted to reduce in our own lives, like our own behavior that we wanted to reduce, decide how we are going to reinforce an alternative or an other or an incompatible behavior, right? So running a DRI, a DRO, or a DRA. It was pretty cool. We also had to put ourselves on a schedule of reinforcement that was actually attainable. So we essentially wrote for ourselves a SMART goal. How many of you are familiar with SMART? Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat. Awesome. Glad Rachel is. So if you're not familiar with this one, I'm going to tell you what I tell most people in my life. Google it. So Google SMART goal, it will come up, I promise. And it basically lays out like a great way to just start this process for yourself. So we are, I don't know if you can see what it says there, but under the self, oh, sorry, that is what we are, right? It's hard. It is really difficult to reflect on our own behavior. And it's even more difficult to do what our psychologist friends would refer to as shadow work. And this is really Maudie's slide, and she's not with us right now because she is taking care of herself and she hated doing it. She absolutely hated doing it. We also struggled with what we were going to do today. So thank y'all again for allowing us to be 15 minutes late. We were 15 minutes late because Jen's in Ocean City right now for her nephew. And I have been at a kindergarten graduation this morning because my daughter graduated from kindergarten this morning. And she's precious and we're very proud of her. We just got finished doing some sticker books during the break because I've done the self-assessment many times. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to take a break from doing the self-assessment and get instead into my own behavior intervention plan and spending some time with her. So that's what we did is we did our sticker book together. I did her kindergarten graduation. And my husband is with our son right now, who we think broke his toe last night. So thank y'all again for 15 minutes. This was an accommodation that I asked for, and thank you for providing that grace. We appreciate it. Thank y'all also for providing us the accommodation for the fact that it's Jen and me instead of Jen, Monty, and me. So thank y'all. This was part of this was wouldn't have been I wouldn't have been able to do a few years ago, right? Anxiety would have said like you can't do it that way. We either have to shut it all down or just push yourself to a limit that you're not able to actually meet. And then you feel like a failure because instead of asking for a pretty simple accommodation, it would have instead led to a lot of maladaptive behaviors within my own personal life. So that's the reason why we do this self-assessment. That's why every new hire who works at our agency does this self-assessment, because there are going to be times you're going to have to say, you know what? I'm running late this morning and I don't need to know why you're running late. I'm going to give you that accommodation and I'm just going to let the caregiver know, like, so and so is running 15 minutes late. We've never had a single caregiver complain about it unless we've actually had to cancel the session too frequently. And then that's when we were like, I don't know if what you're using in your self-assessment strategies are necessarily working, or when we get into our behavior intervention plan. Hey, it's great to see your face, Leanne. So again, Leanne, she's parenting with ABA. We are actually doing a little bit of a talk with her in June. Is that right?
Yeah,
June?
June 7th, if that's a Wednesday.
That sounds right to me.
Yes, that's no, well, no, that was May 7th. June 4th is a Wednesday.
June 4th, that Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month. So we're excited about that one. We've, Jen, Maddie, and I've been talking a little bit what that's going to look like. So we're excited about it for sure. Um, so thanks. Thanks, Leanne. Okay, so when we do these types of reflection exercises, it's not very pretty, right? It's just kind of one of those things that we, again, as behavior analysts, really love to look at what other people are doing wrong, not what we're doing wrong. It's one of the reasons too why in supervisory relationships, supervisors struggle the most with accepting feedback as opposed to supervisees. But we often get very butthurt when those supervisees don't accept the feedback that we've just given them. So it's a two-way road, right? This is why sometimes we have to go through these types of reflection practices, because it does really help us see where we might need to be spending a little bit more time in our own lives. So the next step of this is recognizing how our own bias play into our behavior. And I know Jen's going to lead us in a pretty beautiful exercise, and then we'll get into more of the behavior intervention plan for ourselves that follows up on this assessment.
I think before we hop into that, we're going to
Yeah.
do our first break. So let's do like a 7-minute break, given that most folks need to still leave on time. Totally cool. So if we do like 6 to 7 minutes, it keeps us totally in line with CEs, allows us to have that 15-minute buffer. Thanks, y'all, and end still at 3. So
Okay.
or adjust for time zone. I'm not good at that math. Um,
So we're
so see you at 15 after the hour.
perfect. 11:15. Awesome. Or my time. 12:15, 1:15. Sorry.
Yeah, all good. So I was like, I'm not mathing.
You don't have to East Coast. It's us over here on the mountains. We have to do all the time zone math.
I know. That's why I'm like, I don't know. I'm on the East Coast.
Yeah, and then
I have,
Rachel,
I
bless her
have time.
heart, she's 6 hours.
I have time zone
You don't
privilege.
get to complain about time zone when
Mm,
I've got to work out all the different time zones and Google, oh, it was on PST and what's this? And it's a
it's
nightmare.
so true.
Every week I go, I have to remember the time zone that even I'm on, Google it to make sure that I'm not insane.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're like Greenwich, not far from here. We're like,
Well, we're
and
not even on Greenwich Mean Time. We're now on British summertime. So
oh my goodness,
Oh,
I don't even know what that means.
it's the
and
summer.
then Elif, you are too? Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay.
All right.
So
Pond,
that's a lot.
pond
Yeah.
hoppers.
15 after.
Germany. So probably like an hour.
Wow.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
All right.
Okay. 11:15. Or, 7:15. Welcome back, everyone. Jen, are you ready to take us into it? Not quite. So I'm just going to vamp just a minute. I'm just kidding. So Jen actually, her sister does this for a living, essentially. So what she really does is this deep work all the time and help other people through this deep work all the time. So Jen was fortunate enough to be raised in a family where this was at the forefront of all these dinner conversations. That was not at the forefront of our dinner conversations. So if you were raised like my family, where you didn't see color, and for those of you who might be listening, there were air quotes because that's just not possible. So those will be some of the exercises that we're going to be exploring today with the help from Jen.
Oh man, I have so much to say about that. So that is absolutely true. It's interesting because as some of y'all know, and some of y'all were there, so thank you for those who were there. In Dallas, we just had an amazing book launch for Reframe, and we had this fun exercise that was like, which author? And there were like these different quotes. And I had a quote that I had said in a training that was like, in order to talk about our future, we must recognize our history. And my sister was like, oh, funny. I didn't know I was an author on the book. And I was like, she's like, do you cite me? And I was like, Victoria, I don't think that like you exclusively like say that. And she was like, no. And so yes, this is my sister's Dr. Victoria Farris. This very much is the work that she does. And so I have learned a tremendous amount from her. And we often and she often starts like her talks talking about like our family of origin. And I'm happy to share kind of a little bit about what that was like. Um, I would say generally we were raised in a family, we were raised in New York, which kind of is a pretty liberal area. Raised to I actually took my beach hat off before we got here, so I don't know if people are familiar with this is, but this is a Grateful Dead hat. So my dad was at Woodstock, my mom was burning her bra. And so to pretty, and both had like, white collar jobs. My dad worked in New York City. We lived on Long Island. So pretty, middle class, working hard, class family, like working class family. But we certainly had some level of privilege. We came from families where we could afford to go to college and are cisgender white folks. My mom is first generation American. She was born in the UK. She was born in England. And my dad grew up right outside New York City. And so he grew up in a very kind of culturally diverse area. And so we grew up in a pretty culturally diverse area. And when I say that, it was like we grew up around Black and brown people. Like it wasn't weird for us to see people of like all different races and ethnicities. We saw Black people, brown people, um, I don't, you name it. Like New York City is like a melting pot, right? And we grew up roughly like 20 minutes outside. And for a while, my dad worked for the government. And so we were outside Washington, D.C., which again, like, kind of similar, a little bit, probably more. The suburbs of Washington, D.C. are certainly a bit more affluent than the suburbs of New York City, in many ways, because you have a lot of politicians and all of that kind of stuff, but similarly. And but also like at the same time, I think that that was a bigger lens than a lot of other people had, where we very much like we grew up in a time where I don't know, I'm going to age myself here, but like the We Are the World, remember that? I mean, I was 5 and in Washington D.C. holding hands with people in protest for like world peace and breaking the hunger crisis. So it was very much a part of our lives where we were taught about equity and inclusion. My dad was a Special Olympics coach. My dad also volunteered. A lot of this actually came from my dad. Most people who know me know that I share a lot of stories about my mom, but all of this actually came from my dad. And he doesn't really get a lot of credit in our family, to be honest, because he has two daughters, and the mother-daughter relationship is always the one that people talk about. But a lot of this comes from my dad. He's a real good dude. And so when we were young, I don't even know the name of the organization because I was pretty little. He volunteered, and we would go into what at that time they called the inner city. And it was probably like similar to like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. It was like a mentorship program where they would essentially bus kids from urban areas. No worries, Leanne. Life is lifing. It's okay. All good. We'll see ya. We'll see you in and out. Happy to have you for any time we do. And we're essentially they actually do this up where I am now, where they bus kids who live in the city out to more like rural or suburban areas. And so we would volunteer, which is funny because we didn't live in a rural area necessarily, but there was a park. And so it's funny now that I say that out loud. I'm like, oh, we went to the park, and we would do this on a semi-regular basis. I don't really remember how many times. Again, I was probably like 6, 7. We moved back to New York when I was 10. So, try to remember when you were that old. And I'm in my 40s. That was a long time ago. And so we went, and it was like we hung out, there was a barbecue, there was like all this stuff. I'm sure that there was like some therapeutic thing that we were supposed to be doing, but like had no idea. Like it was about community and building community. And so from a very young age, like my dad is someone who, and my mom too, but I remember this more from my dad. And if you know my sister, you know that she really values community as well. And I think a number of you know me and know like how much I value community, and know Meg and how much she values community, which is probably how we came into community with one another. And so building community and a sense of belonging and learning that everybody belongs and everybody is equal, and not this idea that like, and I'm not saying this to like, throw mud in your direction, Meg, but the idea, I heard this from a lot of people who live where I live, which is a very predominantly white area. There is 3% people of color in the entire state of New Hampshire. It is crazy. And New Hampshire is not a well-populated state. So 3% is like that is not a lot. Have said I don't see color, right? And saying you don't see color means you don't see how your color and your privilege is different from the color or privilege that somebody else has, right? And so it says like, people think that like I don't see color means I'm not racist. And like that's actually not true. That's like a pretty racist thing to say. And is a pretty white thing to say. Like that's a pretty me and my sister say them well-intentioned white lady. A lot of harm is done by well-intentioned white ladies, right? Like it's like this idea that I'm not there, it's not intended, there's no malintent, right? Right. It's a very privileged thing to say. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit. That's a little bit about like kind of our origin story. And so I think, there's no such thing as the woke Olympics, right? Everybody's at a different place in their journey. Everybody's at a different place. And I would say that I think we started ahead of where a lot of other people even are as adults, just by like the nature of the conversation. Oh, I knew where I was going with this. So yes, we were holding hands and we are the world, we are the children. When the AIDS epidemic happened, we were talking about that at our dinner table. Our parents were letting us know that being gay doesn't mean you're going to get AIDS. And they were informing us that that is a stereotype that simply is not true. And at that age, I was like, I don't even know what it means to be gay. And like some of that was like, I just wasn't even old enough to like even know like what the, like I was like 6. Like I was like, I don't actually even have any idea like what you're talking about. Like I was like, there was a lot of the uncomfortable conversations generally came from my mother. And I really value that because I'm very open to having uncomfortable conversations with other people. My kids don't value that as much. Because I, now do what my mother did. But that was a conversation at our dinner table, which was like, just because they're saying it on the news doesn't make it true. And so let's talk about what truth really looks like. So we were talking about fake news a way long time before other people were talking about fake news. And one of the things that they really instilled with us was this idea, not idea, that like you make up your own mind, right? Like it is your job to decide who you want to be in the world, how you want to show up. And it is absolutely unacceptable to treat anybody any kind of way except with kindness. Um, and understanding that like everybody is different. I mean, we spent a Christmas Eve, handing out coats and peanut butter sandwiches to homeless people in New York City. When I was 8 years old, I learned about a newspaper that raised money that was written by homeless people in your unhoused people. I'm sorry, that is homeless is no longer the word that we are supposed to use. Unhoused folks in New York City, and all the money went back into the housing community to help build housing. And so every time we were in the city, I was like, we had to buy it. We have to go buy it. We have to go buy it. My dad was on the initiative to start the recycling program in our homeowners association. And so this was kind of like, I said to Meg, we were talking about something that the contents doesn't matter, but I said something to her the other day where I was like, oh, don't worry. I learned how to fight these fights at a very young age. And this is what I mean is that this was instilled in me from and my sister from a very young age, that like this is how you do the good work in the world. And it was never like, I don't think it was, and again, this isn't necessarily for me to decide. At the time, it didn't feel like it was like from a saviorist perspective. Like it was just like, this is community and this is our community. My dad grew up in Queens. Like it was very much just like all integrated part of kind of our life. And so all of that to say is like we all come from different places, right? Meg grew up in Texas. Texas and New York aren't the same place, right? And New York and Virginia aren't the same place, two places that I spent my childhood. And New York and New Hampshire are certainly not the same place. I grew up in a very, as I said, like liberal, diverse, somewhat affluent community. Not affluent by Long Island standards, but by definition, Long Island is one of the more affluent areas of the country. And I live in a place where across town, people are impoverished. Rural poverty is significant in the state of New Hampshire. It is predominantly white folks. They're predominantly Title I schools, and it is predominantly red. And I stick out like a sore thumb. And it's really interesting to me because especially as a behavior analyst, I don't even know what to say other than it's really interesting to me. But I have a lot of these conversations with my kids, right? And I guess that segues into us like thinking and needing to recognize our own bias. And one of the things that it's important to think about is like privilege and bias aren't the same, right? And so privilege is the way that the things that we have and the ways we're born into the world that give us, I think many have probably seen the picture or the meme that has gone around on the internet, right? That is like oh hey, it's like the white man's in front, right? And then like as you go through the race, there are people of there are BIPOC folks and different things, right? And the further ahead, the further you ahead you are, is the more privilege you have, and some of that is just by nature of who you are, right? That's different than bias, right? And so privilege is kind of the thing that gives us a lead in front of people in the world because of who we are, that is different from who they are, if that makes sense. And I'm sure my sister would tell me that I could have described that better. But she's not in this hotel room right now to be able to do that. She just texted me and I'm like, can she hear me? Does she know that I'm not saying the right thing? And then we have bias, right? And bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against an idea or thing, usually in a way that is closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. And biases can be innate or learned. And so saying you don't have any bias is about the same as saying you don't see color. Everyone has bias. Every single person has bias. Now, there's a couple kinds of bias. There's implicit bias and explicit bias, which I think I explained on the next slide. Yep. So explicit bias is, I don't have my usual two screen setup, so I might just talk and then be like, oh yeah, I said that here. With explicit bias, individuals are aware of their negative attitude or prejudices towards groups of people and may allow those attitudes to affect their behavior. So let's nicely think of what some of those are, okay? So I'm a New Yorker. I know we have a couple of folks who are not from the States. Do we have folks that are from the States? Yeah, okay.
And I'll
So,
say this too, like I feel like globally we're experiencing explicit bias.
oh yeah, oh for sure.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say, like, what are some biases that you might have against New Yorkers? I know what some of them are. People say we're rude, right? Right? People from Boston hate us because our sports teams are really good. Real talk. Right? Like think about things like those types of things. That's all bias, right? Um, hold on. People outside the States, y'all have some thoughts about Americans, right? Y'all especially have some thoughts about Americans right now, right? Okay.
But you
We
said to be nice, Jen, and I think that's where everybody's getting stuck
yeah.
because it's hard to be nice right now.
Listen, I mean, fair, right? Oh yeah, Jersey has plenty, right? And so, especially from a New Yorker, right? Like, one of the things, can you take it? Are you cool for like for me to give a Jersey joke? Okay, so we're like, at least we're not from the armpit of America, right? Like we call Jersey the armpit of America because like Long Island sticks out here, right? And so like if someone was like, "Oh, you must be from Jersey," I'm like, "I'm not from Jersey. I'm from New York." Or when people are like, "Oh yeah, I'm from right outside New York City," and they're like, "Yeah, in Jersey," and I was like, you're not a New Yorker. You live in Jersey." And like literally, someone could live in Jersey City, which is in fact closer to New York City than I grew up in New York, but you're not a New Yorker, right? And so these are all things that like impact, the way that we feel or think about somebody. Like I'm like, I would never move to Jersey. Why? Like literally why, right? I mean, I wouldn't move back to New York either, to be fair. Like I am a Northeast mountain gal. That is where I belong. But like we're like joking about these things, right? But like these are examples of bias, right? Um, you walk in someplace and you might talk to one person over another because they seem friendlier. Okay, so you might talk to the person from this wouldn't seem friendlier to me personally. You might talk to the person from Texas because they seem friendlier to then the person from New York. And to me, I'm like, oh, no way. That doesn't seem friendlier to me. As a white liberal woman, that doesn't. I have my own bias, right? Like that guy is definitely carrying Republican, right? And like that might not even be true, but in my head, overgeneralization. That's right, of one experience and one type of person. And in many ways, it's not necessarily even warranted, right? Where did we see these things? In real life? I don't know that I've seen a carrying white Texas Republican in my life. I mean, maybe. I guess I was just in Dallas, so I probably did. But I just have this, I don't spend a lot of time in Texas intentionally, quite frankly. I do it for Meg. I do it for Meg. My family lives in Texas and I don't go visit them. And part of that is we feel safe in places that the people around us feel safe, right? And we all have social media. Oh my God, doesn't know social media. And before social media, what was it, right? TV, when people read magazines for sure. Instagram, yeah, everything, everywhere, billboards, right? Like we don't have a lot of those anymore, but all of that, they put it all out there. And so like, why does that matter? Because it shows up everywhere, all day, every day. Every time you drive through an area where you lock your doors, your bias is showing. Every time you walk past someone that makes you clutch your purse, your bias is showing. Every time you worry about the person around you and the impacts potentially on your children, your bias is showing, right? You don't even know that person. You don't even know them. Okay, so there's explicit bias where you know that, right? Where I know, I don't really like Red Sox fans. I mean, I live in New England now, so, but hey, listen, I am who I am, right? Um, there are people who are like, I hate those standard acceleration charters. I don't like any of them. Okay, fine. You don't even know me. Like you don't even know that I want to talk to you about my chart. I do, but like that's not the point. But like we again, yeah, go ahead, Meg.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, and also like on that same vein, how many times have y'all gone to Reddit to see what other people think about ABA and their
Never done it.
bias towards ABA?
Maybe like only do that when you are like
I
really,
never go
really
to
low.
Reddit, just so y'all know, because I just find
I
it to
don't
be a very negative place.
I
If you
But
want
don't
to
use
feel really
Reddit.
bad about the field, go to Reddit. If you want to feel like you're a terrible
If you want
person,
to feel
go
bad
to
about
Reddit.
if you want to feel bad
yeah,
about anything, go to Reddit.
Go to Reddit.
100%.
Which
So don't do that.
ironically,
But
the
if you want to
best
see bias, go to Reddit
Reddit
or Yelp. Good God.
or
Any review, that's
Foxy.
explicit bias.
Um, yeah, I mean, again, how many times have you heard, again, it goes the other way too. Oh, behavior analysis is this, right? All behavior analysts are insert whatever. Great. Okay, well, that's your own bias, right? It's like, I think that they're not all great. I actually don't even think that they're all great. I don't think most of anything is all great. That's not how that works, right? Yeah, opinions are polarized, one extreme or another, and that's how many biases come into play, right? And so there's also implicit bias. So implicit bias is the attitude or internalized stereotypes that unconsciously affect our perceptions, actions, and decisions. These unconscious biases often affect behavior that leads to unequal treatment of people based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, disability, health status, and other characteristics. Okay. Do you guys feel like you understand the delineation between the two? One is like the ones that people are like outwardly, right? So I'm going to give an example. So to me, like, and I think most people say this, like, I'd rather know you are wearing your racism on the outside than wearing it on the inside, right? And so I live in an area where we have people that drive by with their like, let's go Brandon flags and all this other stuff, right? Fuck Biden, this, that, the other thing, right? I'm like, okay, I know where you stand. Now I have my own bias to the opinions that I have about those folks. And quite frankly, they have their own bias probably about what they think about me too. And that's clear, right? Like, and maybe that's unfair to say that those bias are intertwined. I'm just using an example. It's not like people necessarily walk around with shirts that are like, I mean, maybe actually, I have seen a shirt that says this, I hate liberals. I'm like, good, at least I know. At least I know
We
that
were
the
at a
people
Little
who
League tournament last weekend and somebody had drawn two swastikas and written WP underneath them. This is in Colorado.
oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where we are right now.
And so
With
you're like,
explicit
okay,
bias.
so I know you're an anti-Semite, and so at least I know, right?
At
And so
least I know where not to go.
and you're putting that out there. And so for somebody who is Jewish, they clearly know you are not a safe person for me, right? And the impacts of implicit bias in many ways can be more harmful because you don't know whether it is there or not. And so for us, particularly as white folks, it's extra, extra, extra important that we recognize what our own biases are and the way that they show up every day, right? And that is in all the ways, in the ways that we exist in the world, but certainly in the ways that we exist as supervisors, right? As mentors. When we're talking to caregivers, when we are providing treatment, how does it impact the way we're engaging with our learners? People talk about cultural responsiveness. You cannot be culturally responsive if you do not sit with yourself and recognize what your own biases are and how they show up for you. Okay. And so we're going to do a little exercise, and I'm going to ask you guys to lean in to this idea. Okay. And if you're open to share, that would be great at the end. And if you're not, that's okay too. This is really an exercise for you just to kind of lean in and have something to think about. So I find it's a visualization exercise, so you don't need anything to write with or anything like that. I always find a visualization exercise to be easiest when your eyes are closed, just because you don't have the visual distraction of anything else. But if it feels more comfortable to like lighten your eyes or to look down, that's fine too. And what I'd like you to do is I'm going to say some different words, and I want you to visualize what the first image that comes to mind for you after I say what each word is. Okay? Everyone feel ready to go? Yeah? Okay. Principal, CEO, custodian, BCBA, teacher, parent, athlete, server, pilot, an Olympian, an autistic person, a doctor, a professor, a president. What came up for you guys if you're open to sharing as you were doing that?
Initially I thought about more white men than I would have liked to. But
That's a really common one.
I actually did notice that a lot of the time when you were mentioning things, I was coming up with like people that I know. So you said
Uh-huh.
athlete, for example, and I thought about my sister because she works really hard as an athlete, and that was literally the first thing that came to my head, which is quite
Hmm.
fun that it wasn't just all white men.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
Mine was also a lot of people that I know that have those professions.
Hmm.
Where like when you said Olympic athlete, I thought of like Simone Biles, who's like super
Great.
just really popular in like the
Mhm.
media right now.
Yep. 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 What else? What do you think of when the one I often like still bums me out a lot is the CEO. What came to mind when you said CEO?
Actually, my mum, because she's been a CEO before, so that
That
was
makes
quite
me
fun.
so happy. That makes me really happy because often,
And then
like even
I thought of you guys too, because you own your own businesses.
I love that. So I have done this with my own team, and they still were like a white man. And I'm like, meanwhile, like we're sitting right here, right? Like Meg and I are both CEOs, right? That's not I don't use that title. That's not my preferred title. Which no judgment if it is yours. It's just not mine. I'm a CSO, Chief Science Officer. That's what I like. And when you're in the position to make up your own job title, it's kind of cool. And so that's what I decided on. And yeah, it's really interesting. It is very common that people say they see a lot of white men, and most common that people say that they see people who look just like them. And so it's just a good exercise to think about because we're generally not necessarily just serving populations that look just like us, right? And so that is an area where all of our biases just showed up as we were thinking that, right? Did you envision anybody who had any like physical impairments? Was anybody in a wheelchair? Was anyone have any kind of mobility issues? What did you envision when you said a BCBA? Were they a woman? There's plenty of male BCBAs, right? A white girl, right? There's plenty of black men in behavior analysis. There's plenty of um, you know, black and brown folks, plenty of them, right? I mean, I think white women are the predominant for sure. How about custodian? And so these are areas that like part of the exercise, right? And this isn't to be like tisk tisk. This is because this is just to kind of recognize in ourselves when we just sit with it and what comes to mind for you right away, it allows you to say, oh, because that's not necessarily, I appreciate that I think it was you, Rachel, that said more white men than I would have liked to admit. Same girl, same. As a white business owner, a white man is what I see. When I say doctor, my sister is a doctor. I see a white man. I have plenty of friends who are doctors. And so it does just tell us, I shared all of my upbringing, how this was all, in theory ingrained in me since, you know, early in my life. And here we are. And so it's just our job every day to recognize that. And we have ethics codes, right, that say, talk about cultural responsive practice, but nowhere do they say recognize your own bias. And you really can't, like I said before, engage in culturally responsive practice if you can't recognize your own bias. If you're going into a family home and have some level of judgment. So this happened to me a couple of years ago with a tech, and she was very well intended, also very young. So she was like maybe 21, was pretty new to the field because she was maybe 21 and she had like just graduated college. And, we work, part of the mission at Sprout is that we work in under-resourced communities. That's the only places we'll ever set up clinics. That is the population that we serve. And so we work with a lot of families that quite frankly are poor. And so she was working in a family home where it was a single parent with 3 kids with autism. The parent had, federal assistance for housing, and they had a 2-bedroom apartment for 4 of them. The mom was literally doing the best that she knew how to do. And the tech came home from session one night and we were talking about, it was like a week before our like annual trainings. And in our annual training, we were talking about like mandated reporting. And she wanted to report the parent because within the 2-hour session, the kid drank 3 juice boxes. And I was like, do you know how much money it costs for people to eat healthy in the United States? That most people who don't have money can't afford to eat healthy. That they literally can't afford it. And who are you to say whether the kid should or shouldn't have juice? She's like, that's just really unhealthy. And I'm like, okay, like, and so I was like, why is that bias? It's bias because you have a preconceived notion that this mother is a bad mother, right? Because she gave this child juice 3 times in 2 hours. Now, do I think that's the healthiest thing for him? No. Sure. And is he getting fluids? Yeah. Okay. Is that something we can work on? For sure. But like to say that she deserves to have DCF called on her because he had juice is a little bit excessive, right? And so like I realize that's kind of a ridiculous example. It's also a real example. But it shows up in a lot of those ways, right? This same family, people didn't want to use their bathroom. Their house was not particularly tidy. And they were like, they would say things like, they're disgusting, they're this. And I'm like, no, they are doing the best that they know how, right? And I'm not saying that that doesn't mean it was like sometimes borderline unhygienic and we had those conversations, but that doesn't mean that they are bad people, right? And it's really important to separate those things out and be able to identify what those things are. So just like Meg said with Dr. Pimple Popper, that those things are going to show up and that's going to happen too, right? And guess what? They're going to know, and that's going to feel really crappy for them, right? In a field where we center, hopefully, relationship building, where certainly we center relationship building and compassion, and being learner centered, right? And family centered and all of those things. If we come in all ruffled and like we know more and like this, that, and the other biases are really just, not just, but like low-key judgments about people that exist in our brains, right? And so whenever we go into a situation with judgment, it also puts a wall up, right? That isn't a really fluid relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Anything else anybody wants to share? Oh, we talked about, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say one thing that I've tried to work on, because I've had a similar situation before where it really was kind of like bordering on neglectful in a home, and it very clear was kind of like the home was just like very, very unclean, but you could tell the parents like adored their children, obviously. And that was a really tough thing to navigate in terms of like speaking to my boss about like what is also like a healthy environment for like me to go into as well. But also like I feel like just sometimes noticing, when you was doing this example right now, a lot of white men were coming up in my mind, but not for everything. But then also I'd immediately be like, okay, and then maybe think of somebody else, or just even like acknowledging, that's the first thought that came up. And actually, just because that thought is maybe the first thing that comes up, that doesn't mean it's like my opinion or my beliefs. It's just kind of also what I've been exposed to in my environment. And then I can maybe sit with that. Or turning up in a situation, love the kids that I work with, but I'll be honest, if there's sometimes some particularly challenging behavior that is just a bit annoying and a kid's being annoying, I can be like, feeling quite frustrated now. They're annoying me. I still care about the child and I can show up and be compassionate, but sometimes just that little check-in mentally to be like, well, this isn't going the way I wanted it to go. Let's drop the agenda maybe you had for the session and just see where it's going to go instead. And that can be really hard. And again, it's not perfect, but like that ego, really hard to kind of just acknowledging that is something that I've been trying to practice.
Mhm. Yeah, and kind of to like take that one further and kind of loop in that bias piece, that would be like if next time, if that, let's say that that was like a little brown boy, right? And next time you saw a little brown boy, you were like, oh, wow, we know where this session is going to go, right? You've placed bias now on that experience, right? And so we have those moments. That's how those things get created, right? And it's not necessarily intentionally, it's the way that things get framed in our brain. And so that happens at a very young age. And now you're all behavior analysts and you're familiar with relational framing. And essentially, bias is a very it's actually not super complex. It's a very elementary kind of autoclitic or relational frame that exists in your brain. It's like if I said white men are, and you could list off all of the things. That's an autoclitic frame as described by Skinner, or a relational frame as described by Hayes, right? And that's what that is. And so what you can do is practice with inner behavior work and on an ongoing basis of both rebuilding those frames for yourself and again acknowledging it and just getting comfortable being like, oh, I know I feel this way about X, Y, or Z. Okay. How we align our thoughts with our behaviors. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Meg.
Oh, no, you're good. So I think this is when we get into more of the self-assessment piece too.
Yeah, I think the next slide goes back to self-assessment. So I was
Yeah.
going to do this one and then take a break since we're at the hour. Does that sound good? And then go back
Oh,
into self.
I think we go into the how we create the components of the self-assessment. Sorry, I'm going off of our notes. And I know that you don't have access to that part of your screen right now.
Yeah, you tell me.
Okay, cool. So this, y'all, we talked about it a little bit ago too, right?
This
The
is where I
components of the
stop talking.
self-assessment. Do it.
So this is where I stop talking. And
Correct.
oh, perfect. Great.
Yeah. So we talked about this earlier when we were talking about the components of the self-assessment and how we got to where we are. So this is also in the book whenever you get to it. And like I said, so it's after the self-assessment. So you can create this yourself. So go ahead, grab your trusty little pen, pencil, typing hand, and make this quick little outline so that you can ensure that these components are part of what you're assessing. And the reason that we do this is because what Jim was just saying is we're not going to be able to turn these parts of our bodies off and our minds off because it's part of us. So, but we have to be able to acknowledge, account for, and shift our own behavior as it aligns with our values and our practice as compassionate care providers, right? Or practitioners. So you can't, because we can't just shut it off. That's compartmentalizing and it doesn't always work, right? It's also active avoidance. So you have to go through the acceptance process of what this looks like. So write these little pieces down. Step one is assess your personal learning history. You've already done that first step before we took our last little break. Then I would say go into the personal ACEs inventory. Again, if you're not familiar with ACEs, go to acesaware.org, and I'm putting it in it's ACEs Aware, sorry, acesaware.org. And that is just a website that you can actually access the ACEs screening tool yourself. And then go through a task analysis essentially of what are some of your strengths? What are you really proud of? You've already done a lot of that, right? That was what the first exercise that we did. Pull from that. Pull from some of those strengths that you love about yourself. Then go ahead and do a values assessment. And this is also something that we provide in Reframe, which is a actual values assessment that we use with ourselves. Anybody who works within our agency, we also do this with caregivers and with learners. And really what it does is just help provide that verbal report to what you want for your life, not as an end goal, but as something that's going to continuously motivate you throughout what you're doing. What are you currently doing? So this is step 5. What are your current committed actions? What are those behaviors that you do, those steps that you do that are in alignment with your values on a daily basis? Write those down. And then write down some things in step 6 of some ways that you can immediately diffuse. These are easier said than done, so just keep that in mind. These are these ideals, right? A lot of us will go through like taking a deep breath. That might not always be effective. So what might be something else that can help shake you out of whatever it might be? For me, it's laughing. Laughing will always get me out of whatever funk I might be in. And then I just let it go as much as I possibly can because I recognize what's important because I just did my values assessment, right? So now you're going to get into ways that so step 7 is engaging yourself, your brain, your mind with what's happening in the environment around you. So to help yourself engage in that present moment, what are some things that you can do? A lot of us, especially if we work with kids, I Spy is a great one because it's something that you can do together to get you back into the session where you might be. Or let's say that you're struggling with just being able to relax in the middle of the night and you're like, I can't go to sleep right now. My mind is thinking about everything else. Well, what can you do to help get yourself back into your bedroom, back into your bed, back into the environment where you need to be to give yourself that rest that you might need? And then step 8 would be matching those somatic symptoms with antecedent events. So those feelings that we have, that inner behavior, that shift, the butterflies, the clenching, all of those things are things that we might feel, and we need to tap into that as behavior analysts. So write down some of those things that happen. For me, my throat gets tight, right? My face gets hot. I feel something happening in my chest. It's not a heart attack, but you never know. So like there are these things that happen in our bodies, and we often excuse them. The pain that's in the between your shoulder blades, right? These are things that we often ignore, but I'm asking that we really pay attention to them because they're signaling something, right? And then step 9 would be demonstrating perspective taking. Jen led us on these beautiful perspective taking exercises earlier between our own implicit bias. Many of us envisioned only the people that we've seen in these positions. And that's because then we're not then able to necessarily take the perspective of somebody else who shows up into that space that might look different. And then the 10th step would be looking at what that might look like for a child. This is where you might have to tap into your inner child a little bit. You might have to go back to your history. Were you told that it's okay to cry or to whine or to throw a temper tantrum when you were a kid? No, that was not allowed in my house. I now struggle with that as a caregiver. And I also see whenever I walk into other people's homes and I walk into a caregiver's home and they also are struggling with that. I'm like, oh man, they're safe to express these things in their home. And they're like, it's driving me absolutely crazy. You're like, oh yeah, actually, I feel that too. And yeah, and it depends on where you are. Stimulus control, right? So those are things that we need to be accounting for. And if you notice too, going through those steps, they were all rooted in acceptance and commitment therapy. Interesting, right? So Jen touched on relational frame theory. And it's what ACT is. These are frames that we're building. So when I went through these 10 steps, each one of those steps is essentially helping create that frame, build upon that frame, and help us go into behavior rather than active avoidance. Because again, most of us don't recognize that as behavior analysts, we're actually engaging in some pretty wild avoidant behaviors when we are putting everything towards observing somebody else's behavior rather than our own. And as we talked about last week, radical is that last R in reframe, right? We do have to go this far. We do have to go this deep in order to change our own personal behavior, which is then showing up in an environment where we're expecting other people's behaviors to also change. Okay, we're going to share some data now. And this is data from our own agency. This is from after everybody's completed the self-assessment. I asked them, what do you think? What do you feel? Some of them struggled to complete it. And I will be real. Most of the people who have struggled to complete this type of shadow work, this inner work, and these types of assessments, and again, using shadow work in a loosely basis way, recognizing that it's not part of our field of study, but from psychology, that's fine. Most of them didn't end up staying. Why? Should I look at that as that we have high turnover, which we don't, but should I look at that as like a high turnover issue? What actually ended up happening whenever those people left probably saved us a little bit of heartache. It probably saved some harm, in all honesty. Because what often would end up happening, and I think we've all been in this situation as supervisors, is a behavior technician will show up to a shift and you can tell they are not able to meet the needs of that learner. They're not meeting their own personal needs. And yet they're there, clocking in, ready to run programming. What do you think the quality of that session is going to look like? Right. Not very good. What do you think your fidelity check as a supervisor is going to look like? Is it going to be pretty corrective heavy? Yeah, probably. Is then that supervisee going to go home and be like, man, Rachel was kind of a beat today during supervision? Yeah, probably. Is somehow the work going to get blamed for the fact that this person walked into a session without showing up for themselves first? Yeah. And our data indicate the same. And what you can see here is that everybody here has completed this self-assessment. Some people say that they have found their behavior plan helpful all the time, or most people have said that they found their behavior plan helpful all the time. We have 2 people who are like, I don't know, sometimes it's effective. And do you know why? It's because it's a practice. I also know these 2 people. So while it was still anonymous, they still came up to me afterwards. And one of them said to me, they're like, it's really hard for me to practice this. And I was like, I know. This isn't easy. So you let me know what you need from me to help support in this situation. You let the BCBA team know, and we're here for you. She's already doing fantastic things. She's made modifications to her behavior intervention plan. One of those things being the antecedent strategy of providing herself breaks throughout her session. And so all she'll do is she'll just reach out to our Slack channel and she'll say, hey, I need somebody to come hang out with so-and-so. Does she have to give us a reason? Nope. Do I care why she needs a little bit of a break? Absolutely not. What if she's scrolling on Instagram? Who gives a shit? She needed that time. She's not doing it in front of the learner, right? So that's what she does now. And she'll literally walk out with like her phone in hand, like ready to start scrolling. That's fine. She's providing herself an antecedent intervention. We're reinforcing that behavior because what it's doing is allowing her to show up in a better way for her learner 5 minutes later. We need to be doing the same things for ourselves. It helps us then create these types of self-checks to realign our behavior with the present moment. And then I want you to notice this too, that last little thing. Would you recommend that others complete the self-assessment? Yeah. Everybody's like, yeah, pretty sure. And the person again who said, I'm not sure, she doesn't work for us anymore. And that is because it was uncomfortable for her. It was really, 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 really hard for her. And that's okay. Am I mad at her? No. Do I wish her the best in whatever journey she's doing now, or whatever part of her lifelong journey that she's on now? I do wish her the best. Do I have any grudges against her because she wasn't able to show up to learners and she wasn't able to identify that for herself? No. In fact, and she knows this because I said this to her, like, I needed her to be herself and alive in her own body. And this job was probably making it a lot worse for her. We as behavior analysts get really stuck on everybody should be able to do this job. This job is really fucking hard. And we can't hold it against behavior technicians who are fresh out of high school, maybe 20 years old, prefrontal cortices not fully developed. We're holding grudges against them for not being able to show up and do this type of work. Why? So what they called out? They called out because this work is hard. But we are going to identify what can we do to help you. One of the things that I did as a behavior technician is I started tracking my periods, and I would ask for time off when I knew that I was going to start my cycle, because I knew that I wasn't able to show up on day 29 as a normal functioning human being. My boss let me do that. I'm also that boss. So that's why. Before I worked at a restaurant and I was like, I am going to kill someone right now. And I got written up for it. And I was like, I don't want to do that to people. I don't want to punish somebody's behavior because they're a human being. That's what the self-assessment is all about. So we also bring into the learning environment our own bias from how we've worked. What have we done in the past? I have done some really unhealthy things for the sake of saying that I've got a good work ethic. Truly unhealthy, right? I think many of us have been there, worked ourselves to burnout for the sake of saying that you've got a good work ethic. I'm looking at you. I'm actually looking at everybody, and myself included, because it's all of us. This field is really demanding, and it has those types of high expectations. So Jen also did these self-assessments with her team. They had similar results. She did more of an open-ended assessment for how it turned out. But I think that both of our agencies found this exercise and these exercises particularly helpful. What do you think, Jen?
For sure. Is this the right slide?
I think the next, oh,
Luci. This one? Okay. Yeah, so I asked them if they would let me share some of the specifics. Some of them, they're so funny. Were like, it was really long. I was like, it is really long. But yeah, shared, this was from last year. They said, what is one thing that someone can do to make you feel comfortable around them? Like, listen and be helpful, be willing to talk to me about things that may not matter, opposed to only diving into heavy hitting subjects. That's like super helpful. Being open and silly with me, not judgmental, not pressure me into anything I don't want. I was like, I really hope that that doesn't happen in your workplace. But like, again, you never know, especially like around scheduling, right? Like scheduling is so hard. Our scheduler is like basically a superhero. And I try to tell her this on like a regular basis. But you can feel pressured, right? It's like this person called out and we need this session covered. Like, can you do it? And everyone feels like they have to say yes. Again, like Meg said, to show that you have a good work ethic, or to show that you're committed to the team. Describe what you do when you are in a room full of new people. Introduce myself. I start off shy, but then I try to introduce myself to as many people as I can and form connections, observe everyone until I feel safe. I'm also very shy and typically am quiet at first and awkward. I can be very nervous. And so for me, I didn't know who was who. Though again, some people shared with me after, and I was like, it was supposed to be anonymous, and now I know who shared what. But it helped me, honestly, kind of know how to approach some of these situations with them. If given feedback makes you feel upset or triggered, how do you typically respond? Take a deep breath and see how to fix it. I try to take it in and see what they are saying and be a silent listener. I'm a very emotional person, so I usually will feel the emotions after and follow up later. I either shut down or become defensive. I can tell you that I know who this person was and they don't work for us anymore. It was very interesting. Similarly, we put some of these pieces together, and in that behavior plan, and it didn't work. And some of those signs were there, kind of right at the beginning. List one things you have learned about yourself. I'm trustworthy, that I have a lot of childhood trauma, more childhood trauma than I thought. That I am a pushover, that I have a lot of positive and negative experience in my life, and that had shaped who I am today. What do you wish others knew how to show up for you, be helpful? So the same person that said they become defensive also said, I wish others would check in on me more. And so that's a really tricky piece, right? Is like, it isn't necessarily somebody else's job to continuously check in on you if you're having a hard time in the workplace, right? They're not your partner. They're not your best friend. They are your colleague or your supervisor. And while we try to be what people need in the workplace, it isn't a supervisor's job necessarily to be a therapist per se, right? And so there are a lot of accommodations that we can make as supervisors. But one of the great benefits that I saw and my team saw in this was like it really allowed them to like kind of get there and not to focus on the person that's like not here. But to me as a supervisor, it was like really telling because I was like, oh, now reflecting a year later, I'm like, oh, interesting. I see, because I know who some of the people are because they shared how that really was. And so the person who I also know that said that they had more childhood trauma than they thought just yesterday advocated to be taken off of a case because a learner's challenging behavior triggered her. And I was so proud. She's like, I'm really afraid to say this because I'm worried I'm gonna disappoint you. And I was like, I was like, if it makes you feel better, I think I know what you're gonna say. And she's like, it does. And I was like, but I'm not gonna say it for you, but know that I'm right here and I'm here to support you and I care about you and your well-being. And she advocated to be taken off the case. And she was like, is that all right? And I said, yes. And because I think that the way that it makes me feel doesn't do him a service in the moment. And I said, no, I'm going to reframe that for you. The way that it makes you feel doesn't make you feel safe. And you don't have to be in a situation where you don't feel safe regardless. It has nothing to do with him, right? And sure, like maybe that's all the pieces, but you actually just get to say you don't want to do it because you don't feel safe. And that's fine. So it is interesting, yeah, to see these a year later. And so, in what ways has your learning history with your own caregivers shaped your behavior today, being there for others? Some of now I'm like, oh, these are a little bit intimate, but I've been able to take my experience and either replicate them or change them in order to make others feel safe and understood. So again, I think it's a really good first step of reflective practice, right? And we know that that is like one of our colleagues, Dr. Ed Sanabria, has like this really cool visual that he uses that's like a circle for reflective practice because it is like it goes around and around and around and around, right? Like it's like you reflect, you lean in, you have feedback, and it's like just this loop that you have to continually be willing to go around and around. And how do you think these current behaviors are affecting the learners? You can't be there, right, for them when you're upset. You can't, no one, this is where like I'm gonna try to say what Madi says. So Meg, help me out here, right? When our back brain is engaged, right? You can't, the logical part of your brain is in the front, right? And your back brain is your fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. And the front part of your brain, your logical, responsive, decision-making brain cannot engage appropriately when your back brain is engaged, right? And so I often tell, particularly new folks, that like what we do in behavior analysis, when you work particularly with learners who engage in escalated and especially unsafe and potentially severe problem behavior, is actually not normal and is certainly not natural, right? So we're taught to like override what our natural physiological neurological things want to do in our body, right? And to stay in front brain, right? And not move to back brain. And part of, again, kind of looping it together, why it's so important to be able to recognize these pieces and know, okay, this is where I'm at right now. I need to stay up here and not be back here, both for you, right? Because no one wants to be operating from that space, but also for the people around you and the learner that you're working with too. Okay, Meg, this is you. Are you there? Meg, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, do you need a minute? It's okay.
No, we're good. We just found out that my son did, in fact, break his big toe. So he's
Ouch.
out of baseball for 4 weeks. So that's going to
Oh
be fun
man,
to
that's a
spread.
bummer.
It's fine. Everything's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so this next piece, you'll the self-assessment and narrative that everybody was shared, go to page 11, the personal behavior intervention plan. This is where you're going to take the information from that self-assessment to figure out how you can address your own behaviors. Just like good behavior analysts, we assess behavior first. We hypothesize those functions, we find those trends, the patterns in behavior. And then we are going to implement antecedents and response strategies within our own lives to help address our own personal behaviors. So this next little piece, we are going to give you just about 5 minutes to go through this one just for the sake of time. So go ahead on page 11, take 5 minutes for yourself to go through this personal behavior intervention plan. And we will meet back at 12:28. Does that sound right? Sorry, 12:27. Can't do math today. And by 12:27, I mean 27 after the hour for anybody else who's not in Mountain Time Zone. Okay. So y'all, thanks for doing a little bit more hard work. So, yeah, Elif, we're actually going to go through this exercise. So don't worry. On question number 4 in particular, we're going to do this one in particular. So, um, this was really supposed to be more of like one of these exercises where you're doing something while you're also recording something. And the reason for that is to test to see, is this something that's going to work for you? So one of the first ones is going through this metaphor. And this is a metaphor that both Russ Harris and Stephen Hayes have gone through. And it's a tug of war type of thing. So what I want y'all to envision essentially is that you've got all of these worries. We all have worries, right? I want you to hold on to them with like these tightly clenched fists. And those worries are kind of jerking you around everywhere, right? They're trying to pull you away from the present moment. They're trying to pull you away from your values. They're trying to pull you towards them because they're negative and dark, just like Reddit, right? It's pulling you in, sucking you in. What would happen though if you were to just kind of let go of those worries for a second? Would anything actually happen? In most instances, nothing truly will happen if we just let go of those worries because we're worrying about uncontrollable events. We are worried about things that are 100% out of your control. What instead are some things that are within your control? Are you in control of your own thoughts and feelings? Yeah, but it often doesn't feel that way. When we give ourselves these types of overt behaviors that align with our inner behavior, it gives us this idea that we have a little bit more control over some things. This is also why committed actions are really, really important. Committed actions help us stay engaged in values-based work. Committed actions are those things that allow us to continue to do and show up for these hard and challenging days and seasons and sessions and certain homes or certain supervision sessions, right? That's what our values do. That's what our committed actions do. So the idea behind this behavior plan is really for you to be able to notice what's happening around you. Find a way to re-engage your body with your mind, with what's happening in the world around you. Describe something that you might be seeing or experiencing. Say out loud the value that's holding you here in place. Then maybe lean into what you might be struggling to accept if you still have some sort of discomfort with being in this present moment. Could it be that you're still holding on to a worry? More than likely. I am not going to speak for everybody, but I'll say this. I think that many people worry about financial stresses. I worry about financial stressors. I have some control over my financial success or stress, right? Do I have global or macro control over financial stress? Can I control how much insurance companies reimburse us per unit? No. I can try. I can write a letter and say, I'd like for a rate increase, please. We have a colleague who is very successful with asking for rate increases. I have never once had success asking for a rate increase. That's okay. I don't have control over that. I can do other things that are within my control that are also in alignment with my values. Does that mean that I'm going to go sell my company to a large private equity investor so that then anybody who works under ABA across environments starts soliciting at malls or places like that with diagnoses in hand up in those rates? No, I'm not. I'm not going to do that because that's not in alignment with my values. But I'm going to accept where insurance rates are, and I'm going to provide quality services and pay my staff in a way that is reflective of the work that they're doing. And that's okay. I can let go of some of those worries sometimes. I can also validate that this is difficult. And then I can go back to any of these steps that I might need to get myself back in alignment with where my values and my behavior meet. We talk a lot about boundaries, right? And there's that, everybody's been like, I don't know, not everybody, but there's a pretty prominent quote that says boundaries are where I can safely love you and myself at the same time, right? Well, that's really what committed actions are too. This behavior plan is really designed to help you say, oh, this is where my boundary is. And I recognize that if I push a little bit further, I'm going to be pushing beyond where my boundary is, which is going to overextend me. And that's going to actually be taking me further away from my values and not closer to, right? So those are the things that we think about whenever we're doing this type of behavior intervention plan, because our personal behavior shows up in the environment where we work. If we show up into that home, like where Jen was describing earlier, and we haven't accounted for some of these things, I'm going to be worried about that child's juice intake. I am going to be worried about what somebody thinks of me as a mom, and though it's reflective of me as a behavior analyst because of how this mom interacts with their child. Do you see how it actually had nothing to do with that mom? It doesn't. It has nothing to do with that mom, the way that that behavior technician felt. It was her own projection, her own history, her own behavior showing up in that moment. That's a problem. And coming in like a savior. You're doing this wrong, Mom. I'm calling the authorities on you. You. We can't do that as behavior analysts. That's actually pretty much the number one reason why everybody hates us is because we come in and we tell everybody that they're shit and that we know better because we know the science of behavior, but you're not applying it to your own life. If you did, you would recognize that that's not something that you can say or do. You need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And that is also part of my history. Yeah, you'd recognize that you're an asshole. To our colleagues who have written these really eloquent papers about how awful everybody in the field is because they're not experts, check yourself. What makes you an expert? Because you think that you're better than I am? No, no, sir. No, ma'am. We all have the same inherent self-worth. There is no single person in this entire world who is worth more than you. I'm saying that to you, all of you, because there isn't. And when we allow our peers, same people, when we allow our peers, our colleagues, or others, or CEO, or CSO, or CFO, or COO, or a white man tell us that we aren't worth as much as them, I've got a big old double finger for them. And a nice old bless your heart. because you're worth the same as I am, despite how many publications you have. You're worth the same as I am, despite the fact that you've never once stepped into these trenches the way that we are. That's how we show up for our learners every day. That's how we show up for our families every day. We're not saving them. We're sharing this journey with them. That's part of what this behavior intervention process is supposed to be, is to share this lived experience, just as Jen just said, with our learners. So let's talk about real briefly how this shows up in supervision. And I think that Jen's taken us to this part right here. And then we'll wrap up for the day. But y'all are doing amazing. Heavy stuff. So
This
thanks for bearing
is
with us.
this is Mari's slide.
This is Maddie's slide.
I'm not sure that I can do it justice. I could try.
Well, maybe what we could talk about too is just
I can hop on that soapbox that
yeah,
you're
hop on that
on.
soapbox for a minute.
Okay. I think that, to piggyback on your soapbox, one of the challenges with that article, and to kind of quote what Madi actually posted this week, is it further upholds this, I call it the academic caste system, that like if you exist in academia, it therefore makes you better than the people who do not exist in academia. And I have a lot of challenges with that. Like you said, like being in the trenches, and also like because what makes you better because you're at a university versus like in a clinic, and like how do you define betterness, right? And we define expert by publication, but like in a lot of fields they would actually define, like, so if you were like talking to somebody in like Fortune 500, what they would define success as, right, is like revenue, net profit, right, product. And I'm pretty sure that like Meg and I have more of all of those than whoever wrote that article, quite frankly. Other people define success by income, salary, and like, to be fair, business owners aren't making the most money, but you know who's also not making the most money? Academics. So like in the hierarchy of like who's making money in behavior analysis, academics aren't generally it, right? And so it's interesting to me that like we're defining expert by people who like in most other realms would not be considered to be like uh like top of the food chain, if you would. Like I don't know. And yeah, Pat Fryman does talk about it a lot. And it's this idea that like because you have a lot of research, it makes you better than somebody else or know more than somebody else or all of those things. And again, that leads back to that like inherent bias. And because you have more letters after your name. And also I'm like, we actually have more letters after our names than you do, because I got to be licensed in this state and that country and this country and over here and over there. And so like some of it is just like all these wonky ways of it's caste systems were designed to uphold oppression, right? And so academia is a system of oppression to uphold to maintain power and authority over other people. And that's essentially what I think. I mean, I didn't read the article, to be fair. I was like, I'm not even engaging in this. I read the abstract and I was like, I got other things to do. I just read everybody's feedback. But like that's what comes to mind for me, is like this is how these systems of privilege get upheld. We were recently again at APBA, and we were talking to somebody and saying, we wrote this book. Are we the experts? No. You know why? We don't have enough publications. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that we have more pages in our book than if you combine probably 7 of your publications. Just saying, it's 298 pages. But what do we know? reel myself in here. So we were saying to a amazing colleague, white male colleague, about how we were presenting at a talk and someone was upset because we didn't present enough data. And I chuckled. Well, after I was like, is this a joke? That we didn't have enough data. And Meg and I and Madi in a side conversation were like, I was like, just because we didn't show you doesn't mean we don't have it. Number one, we elected to not show it. So it was an accessible talk because that's not the thing that defines everything. But one of the things we were worried about was exactly that, about like, people. It's interesting, Leanne, I was actually listening to you last night in the car on this long drive down. I know. Yes, I was listening to an episode that you did on parent caregiver coaching, if you will, and you said something very similar to what I'm going to say, in that nobody really is defining. Everyone likes to say that compassion is a buzzword. Happy that it's a buzzword. Everyone's talking about it, right? But people also like to poke it, like, well, where's the research to support it? And he was like, oh yeah. He goes, nobody fucks with me. And we all look at each other and we're like, must be nice to be a white man, right? Like in academia. So you're in academia, you have a bunch of publications, and you're a white. And he was like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like he basically was like, acknowledge his privilege, you know. And anyway, that's a real thing that exists, that has nothing to do with the slide. I have no notes on this slide. I don't know what you want me to say.
I'll just say, so when we do talk about this, we talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Like when you show up to a supervision session and you feel it, right, with that supervisee and they're kind of on edge already. We've all been in that kind of situation. And then we give them feedback. And how many of us were taught to do the feedback sandwich? You say something positive, you give the corrective feedback, and then you end it with something positive. How effective has that been in your practice? It's like 100% not effective, right? They call it the feedback shift sandwich, right? Like it's pretty bad. So what we find is that when we do this kind of hard inner work with these types of assessments, and you do this in a safe place within your with your supervisees, and your supervisees trust you as a supervisor, when you provide corrective feedback, it minimizes the sting. Why? Because then they're not projecting and you're not projecting. You are literally being objective, which is what we all claim as behavior analysts. Well, we're the ones who take data. There's no bias whatsoever in the data that I'm collecting, but that kid should stop stimming. And I'm going to score every single time they're doing this. And the reality is, like, I remember in grad school doing functional behavior assessments and observations with students in the classroom. And half of the time, more than half of the time that I was looking at my target kid, he wasn't doing jack all. But every other kid in the classroom was like literally driving me crazy. But we're forced to basically pick at this one kid, find the behaviors, find the stuff that we can treat, find a reason. We do the same thing with our supervisees. So when we have them do that hard work of doing that self-assessment, and when we ourselves do that hard work of doing the self-assessment, it minimizes the impact of this type of corrective feedback. Because then everybody realizes, like, she's not talking about me. She's talking about something in this particular instance. I had a beautiful opportunity yesterday to work with a supervisee who was joining a team. And this kid is 16 years old. He's 6 foot. I've known him since he was 7 years old. And when I took over the case when he was 7 years old, he was doing table time with 2D picture cards, tacting, and doing receptive ID, a feature function class. The kid, since he was 3 years old, had been engaging in, at a minimum, 5 instances of headbanging every single time he was in the shower. But I say we because I still admire this colleague. She didn't know. She was out of her scope. That's what we were focusing on, was feature function class. Not the fact that his mom was terrified to even say it's time to take a shower, to the point where they would go 10 days between bathing. He's 16 years old. How do you think his area smells? Girl, it's rank. So what did we do? Do I just say that's out of my scope? Do I do hand over hand in the shower with him? How do I provide compassion to the mom when I'm like, what do you mean you've only been bathing in 10 days? Talk about DHS getting called, right? Do you know how much we had to talk to the school about not calling DHS? A lot. And for those who aren't in the States, DHS is Child Protective Services. So what did I do? Did I discharge him and give up? Did I talk to my supervisees and say, like, y'all can't go in that home, it's not safe? Or did I say, you know what? I know that you haven't been trained, but we're going to start showering. No, we started low and we started slow. I listened to my supervisees' concerns. I'm afraid that I'm going to get hit. Why are you scared you're going to get hit? Well, because last month he broke your nose. That's valid. He did, in fact, break my nose. So it's fair, right? They had fears. Was I going to say, your fears, you just need to do this. This is the job you signed up for? I sure didn't. We did a lot of training. We did a lot of consulting. We've done a lot of time delay. We've done a lot of shaping. We've done a ton of skills-based treatment. This kid, he's now with his mom. His mom's out of town this week. So I got to talk to grandma, and grandma was like, I've been there since the beginning. And she said, I can't believe that he can take a shower safely. And she said she was here in August. And she said, when I was here in August, he didn't hit his head once. And she was blown away. And then this week I said, how's it been this week? And I was just here yesterday. And she was like, Meg, we've had 0 problems. She said, I've done everything that I've watched y'all do. I've honored it when he said my way or more time. We've done a lot of time delays. But every single time that I've asked him to do something, he's done it. Y'all, and then my supervisee, do you know what she asked me? I'm gonna cry. She said, what does it feel like for you to work with kids and see their progress from the age of 7 to now? And I burst into tears because people don't ask you that. Instead, they say, why aren't you a published author in Java? This is why. Because
Well, Meg,
I'm spending
clearly you're
time in
not
the
an
bathroom with the
expert.
kid. This is why, because I'm training my staff so that they feel safe enough to go into the bathroom with this kid. So these are the impacts of supervision. When we do this type of hard work, we're able to go through challenges with our learners. We aren't pushing our supervisees, just as we aren't pushing the learners. I will be honest, after he broke my nose, I showed up the next day because you like fucking work ethic of mine. And we had to do a full recovery session because in his mind and in his behavior, I wasn't necessarily a safe person for him anymore. So I had to go through that entire recovery. And that was hard for me because I was like, but I've known you for so long. Why did you break my nose? Right? But it was because we were in a tough situation. But I also wasn't going to abandon him. And his mom was worried that we were. His mom was like, are y'all going to discharge us now? And I was like, oh my God, no. And she's like, I've been so worried about that. And that's what these caregivers are dealing with. And that's what our supervisees are also dealing with. So I hope that, well, we go through, like we went through these heavy, heavy topics, right? We talked about our past and how that shows up in our current world, but it actually makes everything a little bit easier, right? When you do the hard work instead of just trying to like check off some check boxes, it makes supervision easier. It makes providing practices easier. It makes, and I say easier, it doesn't make it less challenging, I guess, but it makes it more of a relief when you've reached that precipice or when you've reached that summit. Okay, we are wrapping up for this evening, or this evening, afternoon, evening for my friends in Germany and Wales. Um, but Jen, why don't you tell us what Reframe essentially came together to be? I always do. I'm so sorry. It's like I don't even see
Great.
you take a bite.
I mean, you're focused on
I'm
other
sorry.
things. And I literally just interrupted you to say, clearly you're not an expert. I'm sorry about that.
Nobody's an expert. Everybody's a lifelong learner.
I mean, I think you're an expert on that kid, but that's just me.
Love them.
Um,
I love all of my kids, and you can.
Also, you
I love them.
guys, what you had some event to do right after that too. And you showed up to do that event
APBA.
yeah, with a broken nose. Yeah.
Yeah, it was last year's APBA,
Last
the one
year.
that was in New Orleans.
Yes. Yep. Okay, so the synthesis of Reframe. So Reframe came together as a framework that centers the person receiving care, right? You guys know all of this. Um, it is a compilation of all of the work, well, not all of the work, but a lot of the work that we do every day in practice to help, I think, thinking about how many new clinicians there are in the field. I think that was kind of the initial, like, what we know we're supposed to do is they tell us when we need to know what to do, we're supposed to go to a journal article. And when you go there, no one actually tells you what you're supposed to do in real life, in real practical situations, boots on the ground. You're providing care for this learner. You're in charge of writing a treatment plan. You're in charge of writing, an IEP, whatever it is. And so our goal was to help build that framework for the field of behavior analysis. We love the field of behavior analysis. We're in it. We're in it with everybody. We honor and call out our history. We share insight about it and try to bring all the pieces together to say this is where we came from, this is what we learned, this is what we love, and this is how kind of together in community we can take these pieces and continue to progress our practice in a direction that really centers those we're providing care to. It helps also center the implementers, right? In terms of like, not center them as in terms of treatment, but center their needs, right? And how they can help get those needs met. And really acknowledging that that's a bi-directional relationship, and that relationship is really central to any therapy. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and truly, I mean, this was a passion project. I know we've shared this before. Our hope was to be able to provide um, enough real life examples to make it truly applicable. Because again, that's one of the pieces that we often find is missing from the research. Research is done in a very highly controlled space to account for every possible variable. We work with kids where none of those variables have been accounted for, and all of them are very much present in their environments, right? So that was the hope of Reframe, was to say, thank you so much for your research. Now here's the application piece. Here's how to bridge that gap between the research and what it is that we're really doing. Reframe is available for pre-orders only for about 1 more week. If you are across, not in the US, we'll have to reach out to Shane about what we're doing for international orders. I think if you've already ordered it, it'll probably come to one of us. If you haven't, then we'll have to figure out a way to get it to you internationally. But I believe that Shane Spiker is working on that. He's just in Italy for the next couple of days. So when he comes back, he will let us know what's going on with that, I'm sure. But y'all, thank you so much. Can we answer any questions for y'all in the next couple of minutes? Thank y'all so much.
Thanks.
It was truly nice. It was really wonderful to share this with y'all. And again, if you are interested, June 4th, it's a Wednesday. You might be asleep, Rachel and Elif, but if not, we're going to be doing a 1 hour talk with our friend Leanne, Parenting with ABA. So we'd be honored to have y'all join us there too.
No, it's in the morning,
Oh, good.
US time, so you won't be asleep. So come on down.
Yeah.
Well, you might
Unless
be,
you're
but it's
napping.
not like the middle of the night, at least
Right.
it was.
Pretty good. Thanks, Leanne. She also, most of her stuff is on social media, so Instagram and Facebook, Parenting with ABA. And I know that she'll have links up and all of that good stuff too. If you don't follow her, by the way, she's always got fantastic resources. Truly. Thanks y'all so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Live within your values and take some rest.